All right. Thanks, Jordan.
Your brain might just help you learn something in more ways than one. Welcome to Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Dr. Bell is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He'll be your guide on this crazy exploration designed to bring life back into our existence. Can you become the element of change in an ever-changing world? Possibly, but you've got to listen on to find out. Now here is the host of Absurd Psychology, Dr. Gary Bell.
Welcome, everybody. All right. We're talking about overcoming temptation. Resisting temptation can be extremely challenging. None of us is a stranger to temptation, but nothing makes it clearer how powerful craving and desire can be when you watch a person's life begin to unravel because they gave in. Some people, chocolate is their thing. Some other people, sex is their thing. Some people, money is their thing. Some people, doing things for people is their temptation. Not nearly as exciting and scandalous, but, is chocolate, but it still is a problem. You know, when you love something, when you want something so badly, you are always vulnerable. People that are impulsive, people that are very reactive in their life, that means they tend to crave certain things in their life. You don't realize it, but marriage is like the loneliest place on earth. So many people, when they finally strike up a conversation with somebody that they haven't had in ages, of the opposite sex, and they find that person attractive, they tend to fall into the realm of putting that person in a place that they covet. And the things that we covet are very dangerous because we place them in a very sacred place in our brain and in our heart, and we crave those things. And over time, we begin to obsess on those cravings, and we begin to desire them so much that even though it's not good for us, we decide to give in and go for it. It's really sad, but our brains, when our brain fixates on things, it has a tendency to get very stubborn, very obstinate, and our brain has a tendency to not care about consequential thinking. For instance, when we enter into the honeymoon phase and someone goes, "Wow, I think you're attractive. I would like to be with you." And you go, "Wow, I've never looked at that person that way whatsoever." And now all of a sudden, I'm attracted to them. And all of a sudden, you start making that person sexy because they said, "Hey, you're sexy. I'm looking at you and I like you," and blah, blah, blah. And that triggers a chemical in your brain that somebody wants me. Somebody needs me. Somebody thinks I'm attractive. Wow. And so suddenly you turn that ugly creature into something sexy. And you make everything about them that you can find sexy. And that's called the honeymoon phase. And you go through that magical time where no matter what other people say, you have a rebuttal to keep that in your life. Well, that's how your brain is. Your brain is once it obsesses and it decides to crave something, it will do anything to bring that into your life. Many people will crave spending money or alcohol or drugs, and they will do anything to have those feelings that those drugs give them, or the lack of feelings that the alcohol gives them, or the excuses that they can say because they were drunk, that they get away with doing stupid things. These are things that in life our brain is designed to connect to. Cravings make you feel above and beyond the average feelings. And when we have that, we are susceptible. Our brain ruminates and obsesses on different things in this life. And if you have a heavy fantasy life, this is why pornography is very dangerous in a marriage or in any kind of relationship where you're committed, because as you're looking at the pornography, you're beginning to obsess on and create things in your mind that you would like to have, that you would like to be a part of, that you would like to do. And those fantasies work their way into your life. And so what you have to understand is people that are tempted by pornography, if they are put in the right position, they have a tendency to roll right into those bad things that can destroy the integrity of everything in their life. It seems pretty unfair, that we have that as a part of our brain, but temptation is very important ingredient. And how you manage temptation is it dictates your integrity. It dictates your ability to hold yourself up and say no to things that hurt you, called self-love. Self-discipline is a very noble, incredible quality. And if you can stop yourself from temptation, that is an incredible thing because now you are in control of your life. How you change your brain. You have to follow some steps to do that. And there's many ways to follow that and to train your brain to think in the terms of integrity and structure and boundaries and self-esteem and self-discipline. But we also have to be very aware of when we are tired, when we are bored, when we're stressed out, when we are needing to avoid something. These areas are when we tend to fall into temptation very strongly. What we have to do is think about refocusing and choosing to do something that is healthier. If I'm really hungry and haven't eaten, I'll eat something less desirable but filling and healthy. If I'm not hungry, I will go take a walk, call a friend, go for a workout, work on a project, do something else that's fun. And as the craving continues trying to tempt me, you want to think about revaluing to remind yourself that this is just a feeling of craving. And I need to realize this craving does not define me. It is not something I have to pay attention or to prioritize. It is not a call to action. In fact, I can let it be there and move on with my day without giving in. People that do fasting, not only does fasting help your body, especially if you go a day or two or maybe three without eating and just drink water, what happens is you start to learn self-discipline. And people that do that on a periodic basis are teaching themselves that temptation is not nearly as powerful as I used to make it out to be. One of the biggest things to deal with cravings and temptation is to limit access. Whenever possible, keep the things you crave away from you. Learn from experience that, irresistible things are not easily accessible. And if they're not easily accessible, I am kind of lazy and I likely will not go to great lengths to procure them. You might want to think about a 15-minute rule. Commit to not giving in for 15 minutes. See if the craving is still there 15 minutes later. If it is, try to wait another 15 minutes and remind yourself that the craving will pass. You want to think about what to do when these temptations come forward. Stop and reflect on the consequences before responding. Ask yourself, what am I about to do and what cost will I pay doing it? What potential cost will I pay doing it? Is eating this right now going to serve some purpose and help me, or will I regret it later? And if there's a huge regret it later, there's a good chance that by stopping it, are going to feel better about yourself. The truth is, when you cannot resist temptation, you destroy your self-esteem. This is a huge thing in regaining your own self-discipline. It's a gigantic thing that we as human beings don't realize how powerful it is. It teaches us to trust ourselves. You also have to remember the biology, reminding yourself each time you submit to temptation, make the brain circuitry stronger and more intense. When you do that, when you keep going down the same path that temptation gives you, you're reinforcing that in your brain as circuitry, and you're going to not only do it there, you're going to do it in other places in your life. And it's going to be good. That temptation is going to become more intense, more powerful, and it will take over many things in your life and destroy many commitments that you have in your life that are contradictory to what your temptation is asking you to do. if you really want to take on temptation, you have to also be aware of your urges and your cravings and refuse to give in to them. And that is the key to changing your behavior. Ultimately, your brain has to devalue the temptation and also not only devalue it, replace the temptation with something that's healthy. It's really important to break the cycle of temptation and decrease the cravings and learn what it's like to live without the temptation in your life. Because the behavior is not strongly engaged in your brain, if you've been, if you resisted the temptation early, you have a better shot of controlling all temptations later on as you proceed from there. You can use many of these things, the stop and reflect, the 15-minute rule, the limit access, remembering your biology. You can use that on a continuous basis. It's a very important thing to understand that the way you manage temptation is the way you manage your integrity. And people that do not manage their integrity often end up alone in their old age because nobody can trust them, nobody respects them, not even their kids, not their spouse. Their life is usually very expensive and a train wreck, and it has cost them more than it's given them. And the sad part is you're imprisoned by your old age when you don't manage your integrity. And oftentimes you're going to end up in a nursing home with somebody else wiping your ass and nobody to show up because they don't respect you and they never did. And they don't know why they would have to visit you now. And so if you like to die alone, fall into temptation and see what happens. Keep falling and submitting yourself to temptation and see what happens to your integrity. You know, The other part of temptation is it's obvious when someone doesn't take care of their body or dress well or present themselves well. When people are like that, it tells you that they have a lot of temptation in their life. They have a very strong urge that they can't overcome. That's the most embarrassing thing about being fat. When you're a fat person, you are sending the signal to the rest of the world that temptation is not something that you can overcome. It tells the world that you are somebody who likes to embellish your life with any kind of temptation. It says that is a lot of slippage in your character. Now, I'm not trying to criticize people for being fat, but I am telling you that on the surface, that is the signal that you're sending to people when you do not take care of yourself. It also is a very unattractive part of you because somebody who wants to trust you is going to have a hard time trusting you if you are a person that does not take care of yourself. Because once again, it says that you have many temptations when you go home and you start eating that you can't stop. And if you can't stop there, there's probably other parts of your life that you tend to obsess on and overindulge in. When you start to manage your integrity and manage temptation, it becomes a pleasurable thing. It decreases your anxiety. It dissolves your stress. It alleviates boredom. And your brain is starting to be wired to feel as if you are somewhat in control of the trajectory of your life. If you see temptation as a problem and you want to change how do you automatically act, the bigger challenge is once you've mastered one thing, you want to manufacture the temptation that you've resisted across all temptations. Here's the deal. If you're going to have a relationship, you can love someone and not trust them. But when you trust someone, the love grows. So you can have a friend, you haven't seen him in 5 years. You come back together and you trust each other, that relationship's going to take off like a rocket. So what you have to understand is the integrity of trust in a relationship is the foundation of making a relationship grow. People that cannot resist temptation, who self-indulge, have a problem with trust. They don't even trust themselves, let alone can they be trusted by others. So when you conduct your life in a way that temptation is something you fall vulnerable to, you are telling the world that there are areas of your life that is not trustable. That is a very important signal, if you think about it, to send to people. And it's not a signal that is sexy or romantic or necessarily healthy. You know, the other thing is there's pre-commitment strategies that you can take to stop yourself from losing your integrity. There's one thing, it's called the Ulysses Pact, where you lock yourself into a committed decision before temptation strikes by removing your future ability to choose. I just don't think about those things. I'm married. I don't think about other women anymore. I think about how I can be attracted to my wife. Wow, that's a minority of the population of the planet, male population of the planet Earth, but that would be a incredibly integrity-oriented human being if they could do that. There's also a thing called friction increase, which is once again a pre-commitment strategy to sustain your ability to resist temptation. You add extra physical steps to your bad habits to make them highly inconvenient and highly expensive. Then there's a thing called friction decrease. You remove things from your good habits so they become the path of least resistance. Then there's a thing called bright lines, where you set clear, non negotiable rules instead of vague, flexible guidelines. It's like marriage, it's all based on commitment. If you're committed to your marriage, you're going to be probably working on everything to solve your marriage. But if you're half-ass committed, if you're a try in your marriage, you're worthless because a try has a back door. And a lot of people live in tries. And the people that live in tries fall to temptation all the time. And that destroys life. That destroys everything you think you're committed to. So if you're a half-ass committer and you're a try person, you're never going to really get the full value of what you've committed to. And that's your loss. There's also real-time control strategies. Implementation intentions is what one of the terminologies that's used, where you use the if-then planning to pre-program your exact reaction to a known trigger. If this happens, then I will do this. That's a good idea. That's a way to begin to manage your integrity. So if you're walking down the park with your wife and you see a very attractive girl, you go, okay, if I see an attractive girl, I'm going to look the other way. Now, is that a lifetime strategy? No, that's an initial strategy to begin to devalue what your temptation is. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back and talk more about the emotions involved in temptation. So come back.
You are tuned in to Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. If you have a question for Dr. Gary or his guest, please email drgbmft@sbcglobal.net. Or you can just click on Email Host on the Voice America page. Now, back to Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology.
Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about overcoming temptation. Now, there's a thing called urge surfing. And that is when you notice a craving, a temptation, you visualize it like a wave and you watch it peak and then fade without acting on it. There's also a thing called a 10-minute rule where you tell yourself you can indulge, but only after waiting 10 minutes. There's also a thing called temptation bundling, where you only allow yourself to enjoy a short-term reward while simultaneously doing a long-term productive task. It's really, really important to think that you have to have, especially as a person that's getting older, you really have to have an adult strategy onto how you handle temptation because as you move into your older life, you gain more and more commitments, more and more accountability, more and more responsibility, and temptation is going to cost you 10 times more every year of your life than it would have the year before. So we need to really, really think about how temptation can destroy you. And not just you, your children's life, your spouse's life, your life, your family's life, your friends' lives. Because once you fall to temptation and people realize that you cannot be trusted, there's a real good chance you're going to have to renegotiate all of those relationships. And that may not work out in your favor. You know, who hasn't walked into a party with good intentions to skip the chips and the salsa or whatever, and to discover that, it's really hard to ignore it, that you're hungry, and all of a sudden temptation is right there in front of you. How about those times when you're bored or you're tired and we find ourselves looking around for something to eat or something probably that's bad for us, especially right before bed? You know, then there's this temptation that dieting brings on us. Many studies have shown that those on a diet, it's called a restrictive eaters, are more prone to giving in, heading for unhealthy snacks or finding themselves thinking about food all the time and acting on those thoughts. Because when you're on a diet, you're always navigating your appetite. And that's a pain in the ass. If you've just decided to stop eating at certain times or to cut down on what you're eating when you eat, you have a better shot at dieting. You know, the phrase temptation is remembered as a good way to describe what's happening, but our brains serve up a platter of pleasant memories and feelings of pleasure that we have had in the past when we're eating, when we're indulging, when we're intimate, all of these things, when we have fun times, when we're laughing, we register these moments. Our emotions can run away with us. And studies have found that emotional eating, by the way, ranks high on the list of problematic occurrences for people trying to make healthy lifestyle changes and maintain them. You know, we have to identify a remembered emotion or a current one and figure out which one is driving our actions and then design an appropriate strategy. You know, if you're sitting around thinking about food all the time, maybe you need to have a different strategy where you're thinking about things that actually are you're passionate and give you purpose. Because if your life had more passion and purpose has to be about other people, not you, and how you serve other people, that would be a much better way than eating yourself to death. You know, there's a thing called a suicidal life. And people that indulge in temptation oftentimes are living a suicidal life. They know what they're doing is going to destroy their life, but they just keep doing it. And there's millions and millions and millions beyond the statistics of suicide of people that live that way, and they're going to die or they're going to kill their relationships. They just don't know when it's going to happen, but they just keep doing it. You know, if you look at weight control, by the way, and emotional regulation is often focused on responses to negative emotions like stress, anxiety, depression, anger, loneliness. These negative emotions often result in turning to food as a way to solve it. Well, what is depression, anxiety, anger, loneliness? Well, depression and anxiety are about expectations that are not being met. So if you're going to sit around with high expectations of other people and yourselves, you're going to have a lot of trouble with depression and anxiety. Expectations mean betrayal and failure. So if you're going to label that on so many things in your life that you have expectations of, you're probably going to be a fairly nasty, negative person. And you're probably going to eat a lot and seek a lot of comfort too. If you're going to be an angry person, well, angry people are always looking for being disrespected. You're disrespecting me. You've disrespected me here. Well, life is not fair or just. So shut the hell up and understand that this is not an equal opportunity planet. This is a living planet. You exist as you are. What comes to you. What doesn't. You can influence things, but you don't control outcomes. Life is not fair. Fair is a place where they judge pigs. Get the hell over it if you want to be happy. All these stupid ass communist, liberal, progressive, crazy ass people, all they want is fairness and justice. Well, there is no fairness and justice. You're never going to have it, and you never will. That's why it's never going to work. Communism doesn't work. Socialism doesn't work because life is not fair. It never will be fair. And the minute you go to communism and social justice and all this bullshit, you're going to find yourself being at the bottom of the pile about as miserable as possible, and you're the one that made it happen. So you can only point your finger at your own self. But it's sad. People are so deluded with their own brains. People that spend too much time with themselves are a lot of trouble. Temptation can be very hard for those people because they get so emotionally riled up in their own ideas and thoughts about the way the world should be. I live in Seattle where you have all these intelligent people who don't talk, and they're all bottled up in their stupid hypotheses about life, and they think they're right about everything, and they're dumber than rat shit. And that's because they have no common sense, because they spend too much time in their own head. Yes, they may be intelligent. They probably can do math pretty well. They probably can do science pretty well. They probably can do technology pretty well, but they probably don't do life very well. And those are the ones writing the AI programs. We're done for. So some of the interventions are framed around impulse control, habit clusters, executive function, willpower, health literacy. That's a lot of words. We have to understand that we have to be more present, more mindful, more understanding and responsible for consequences of our own actions. And consequences and responsibility is something that goes way against the younger generation of today because they don't want to take accountability for their stupid psychology or social justice degrees or their stupid soft college degrees that they spend $400,000 on that buy them nothing but an opinion and then a politics so they can run the world and destroy everybody's lives with their stupid philosophies. The bottom line is that, if you want something in your life, you need to focus on what people need. And most people don't need your stupid ass opinion. What they need is a plumber, electrician, somebody that can help their life, somebody that can counsel them wisely, somebody that can teach them something. Not some dumbass that tries to run your life and runs for office and tells you what to do. What makes things tempting? What are some helpful tips on how to resist temptation? Well, being able to resist temptation is an important factor in achieving your goals and changing your behavior. You can change. I can't change. Yes, you can. All of us adapt. That's how we made it through the jungles. That's how we've made it so far as a civilization. We've adapted. You can change. You may have to change. You may have to be forced to change, like many civilizations have had to. But the bottom line is you will adapt whether you want to or not. Look what we did during COVID when all the Nazis took over our government. We all followed their transvestite rules and their stupid ass wordings and all their stupid things that they did to our government and our people. They tortured us for 4 years with a mental retard as a president. And yes, we all followed orders, even the sane ones. We all followed orders because we adapted. If you can't say no to temptation, you'll struggle to stay consistent with your efforts and you'll likely give up before you see any meaningful progress. So you got to keep learning, about temptation. And you got to keep forming strategies to keep yourself in check. Does this really line up with where I want to be in my life? Does this really line up with all the energy I placed into my job? All the energy I placed into raising my kids? All the energy I placed into being married? Does this really line up with that? And do I really want to sacrifice all of that just because I want to do something stupid? Really? We are that stupid. We will do that. Look at this dumb guy that owns the 49ers. He goes off into a trailer in Ohio and sees a prostitute for $140 cash, and he lost his entire integrity over that. All of it. And it's sad because he's an idiot, because he could not resist his own temptation. And these little choices like that are the choices that can absolutely destroy you. That's why understanding temptation is so important. When the brain senses the opportunity for a reward, because all these young people nowadays who get everything for free, they love rewards. They don't like the work involved in rewards, but they love rewards. They love to take their parents' retirement and suck it down the drain as fast as they can and do all the stupid things they can do with that money as quick as they possibly can, betting on games, betting on this, betting on that, spending money trying to make that $1 million and losing their parents' retirement. That's what these young people do nowadays when you put them in charge. When you see a patch of like ripe berries, it releases dopamine, which causes an arousal. And it tells the rest of the brain and the body to get ready for a reward that's coming soon. The dopamine makes us feel alert and excited. It directs us to take action, and the dopamine plays a critical role in our human evolution. It motivates people to focus their energy in pleasurable activities necessary for survival and reproduction, like eating food and having sex. It's really important to understand how big dopamine is, and when you have none of it, like a depressed Eeyore human being, and suddenly something ups your dopamine, you're going to be subjected to temptation, and there's a good chance you're going to fall to it. These people that walk around like the dregs of the earth, like zombies with no feelings, are going to be people that are highly susceptible to temptation because once somebody has aroused them, they're going to have a really hard time stopping themselves because that dopamine is going to be very powerful. You know, a lot of people look for dopamine in their social media, and they look for it in entertainment. They look for it in movies. They look for it in TV shows. They have to just sit there and watch the same stupid series. They have to sit there doing a marathon, viewing of some TV show that they love because they want to just reminisce and grab on to dopamine hits that come from that little TV series that they're addicted to. It's sad, but people are starving for dopamine. And that means that temptation is greater than ever. Kids, especially, are being trained to just thrive on dopamine because they get it from video games. And it triggers a lot of dopamine. And the idea that you can buy some, costume or something in the video game that's going to make you invincible, that's an even bigger dopamine hit. And they want more and more and more and more. And these kids are going to be very depressed as they get older because life is about a journey. It's not about destinations. It's not about results. And so temptation is becoming a very, very powerful thing in the human existence. And that is because we are too safe. We are too safe and we're too in our heads. And we're not functioning as a human being's designed, which is to work, to take care of each other, to be empathetic, to exert energy towards other people. That is a very important part of our existence. And if you start living for yourself, which is what impulsivity is about, you are likely not going to be a very valuable person to the human race. There's a great example, the Stanford marshmallow experiment, of how being able to resist temptation can influence your life outcomes. 4-year-old kids were placed in a room with a single marshmallow and told they could go ahead and eat it now. But if they waited 15 minutes, they could eat 2 marshmallows. The kids were left alone in the room, and as cameras filmed their decision-making process, some of the kids invented all manners of strategies to avoid eating the marshmallow, like turning their backs to it or distracting themselves by singing songs or talking to themselves. Others couldn't resist the temptation and gobbled it up immediately. But the researchers of that project tracked the kids' lives over the next 40 years. And not surprisingly, the 4-year-olds who are most best at delaying gratification, not eating the first marshmallow, will end up having an easier time in life than the others. And as determined by the higher SAT scores, the healthier body mass, the lower incidence of substance abuse, the better social skills, and the various other measures, these kids lived a much better life than their peers who gobbled the marshmallow immediately. When you're trying to stay focused on your long term goals, you need to be able to resist temptation to engage in dopamine stimulating behaviors because they consume your time and steal your focus. With that in mind, there are some things to think about. Make temptation hard to access. First, and the most common sense piece of advice on how to resist temptation is to make it harder to access. For example, you won't return home with purchases you can't afford if you don't carry your credit cards when you go downtown or when you go to the mall. If you have a walk downstairs and down the hall to stick your head in the candy jar, you'll be less likely to indulge in it than if you merely have to reach across your desk. You'll probably be less likely to procrastinate on writing something if you invest in the software programs. If things limit your access to let's say your email or your social media, you're going to have a better shot at having a life that you dictate rather than social media. You do not realize how influenced you are by other people in this life. And social media is retarded because all these idiots at home who think they have all the answers and have researched everything are going to act like they have the only truth there is on this planet. They're going to be so confident in their opinion that it's fact in their mind. Because people are delusional nowadays. They think that what solves problems for them is going to solve problems for the rest of the world. And then they make up these stupid channels and then they go out there and act like they know everything and they know nothing. Nothing. They know just a hint about what they're talking about, but they act like they are fact driven, highly intelligent people. No, these are some of the dumbass people on the planet who want your attention, and they're gonna go and use their one time they actually figured something out that solved the problem for them, and they're gonna magnify that because they think they're a freaking genius, and they go out there and blow the information across the internet, and then all these other idiots pick it up and think that it's fact, and then they find out it's a lot of impulsive stupidity because not everything that works for one person is going to work for everybody else. It's really important to look at temptation, and we're going to take a look at the science of it. So come back.
You are tuned in to Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. If you have a question for Dr. Gary or his guest, please email drgbmft@sbcglobal.net. Or you can just click on Email Host on the Voice America page. Now, back to Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology.
Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about overcoming temptation. Cooling immediate temptation helps redress the here and now bias produced by your temporal discounting. Enable us to take a longer term perspective. Becoming a responsive person rather than a reactive person is what differentiates you as an adult. Making long-term priorities not adds weight to those goals, but helps you defeat your short-term impulses. People that stay on track with their journey rather than trying to make every day a destination are going to have a much better quality of life. You can have very small destinations in your journey, but what you want to do is make them add up to one big, great, integrity oriented outcome. And that hopefully is the passing of your life, that you have contributed to your journey all the way with many incredible outcomes that you took the time to invest in. Many people, many psychologists view self control in terms of the interplay of two distinct self regulation systems. One is that is planful and takes more mental effort, and one that is quick and impulsive and responsive to stimuli in the moment. And so, what the many of the models are is called a hot system, and it dukes it out with reasoning and rational cool, and then the impulsivity of emotions. And what's really important is we get a balance between that. Oftentimes you have to examine your emotional attachment to things before you make a rational decision. If you are somebody who decides that, okay, I'm very exhausted, but I'm in this big city and I want to go travel and see all these things and I want to go to this and eat there and do this. There's a good chance that you may do all those things, but since you're exhausted, you may not be able to actually enjoy all those things. So, what you have to do is you got to read who you are, read what kind of energy you have, and just accordingly. That is how we work. We have to be more self aware. We have to reduce the power that we can give our obsessions. That is a very important quality. People that have obsessive compulsive tendencies have a very hard time with temptation when it comes down, when it falls in the wheelhouse of their obsessive compulsive qualities. Now, who has obsessive compulsive qualities? Well, if you call yourself ADHD, you've got that. If you call yourself autistic, you've got obsessive compulsive qualities. If you have a analytical personality, you've got obsessive compulsive qualities. If you call yourself a highly emotional person, you probably have a lot of obsessive qualities. Many people struggle with obsessive qualities because our brain wants completion in those areas. Our brain really goes after the journey to get those compulsive things that we want, and it will create any opportunity to make it happen. So if you thought you're going to get the greatest ice cream bar on the planet that was ever invented, and it's 40 miles away, you're probably going to construct your day on a Sunday to find that incredible ice cream bar that very rarely other people have a chance to get. You're going to invent a day to get that temptation. That's how obsessive our brains are. Our brains throw out all logic, that the 40 miles of gas is probably going to be about $10, $15 worth of gas. And it's probably going to be a hell of a lot because you got to go there and back. And it's going to be probably a lot of your day. It's going to be a lot of energy. And you're probably going to spend money at the various places that you go to get there. But do you think about that? No. You just think about the ice cream or the candy or whatever it is. So, willpower is very important. How you interact and moderate is very, very, very important. And what is willpower? Well, many people don't have a will. Many people have a broken will. So they just meander through life with half of their emotional tank filled. And they don't really have access to deep love, deep connection, deep caring. They find themselves playing with their kids, wishing they were somewhere else, being with their spouse and wishing they were someone else. This is the kind of life that many people live. But what you have to understand is that when you have willpower, you have a drive. Willpower is a survival mechanism. And as long as you have your will, which all of us have it, you just have to dig in and find it. If you could find your will, your purpose in life, your main driver, the thing that makes you want to get up in the morning, you're going to find that you are going to have a better shot at self-discipline. People that meander through life, they're not in touch with their emotions very much and are just kind of living every day, existing on the planet until they die, waiting to find, oh, well, Thanksgiving I'm going to feel something, or Christmas Day I'm going to feel something, and when you don't, you don't. When people are muted, they have a very hard time finding any kind of emotion around anything. But they sit around waiting to have the moment that they can have actually feel. And it's kind of sad because what that makes them do is it makes them go after the things that are something that's even overstimulating. They're gonna overcompensate to try to make it feel like they're alive. And when they do that, they often make mistakes and they don't resist temptation because they want it so bad. They want to feel something so bad that they will destroy their life just to get that. Neuroimaging and other tools are rapidly adding to the understanding of, our executive processes. It's in the front part of your brain. And it's very important to understand that it links us to gratification studies because the front prefrontal cortex is your executive functioning. That is your logic. And when you have good highways through your amygdala to your prefrontal cortex, when you are able to manage your emotions and have trained your brain to weigh emotions and logic together, you have a better shot at creating those highways that stop you and create the ability to avoid temptation. You want a cool head, but if you want a cool head, you have to develop intelligence. And then not only do you have to develop intelligence, but you have to get good highways to it. That means you have to give intelligence purpose. It's kind of like this. There are vast amounts of geniuses in this world. My kid is so smart. They could do this, they can invent anything, but they live in the basement of my house while I support them and I make their meals and they yell at me and tell me what to do every day. These little geniuses are worthless as tits on a boar hog. Why? Because they have no purpose for their intelligence. It takes purpose. So the people that are out there inventing rockets, discovering how to go to various planets, how to solve cancer, these are not the geniuses that are the top of the rung. These are geniuses who are motivated. It takes the emotional desire to have purpose for your genius. If you have no purpose for your genius, you're just a angry, worthless piece of shit living in your parents' basement. And that's what happens with a lot of people. And it's really sad. And I see it all the time. There's just tons of them out there. And now that generation is going to take over the world and destroy it because it eats its own. It's really important to understand that willpower is almost more important than intelligence. Why? Because willpower means you are going to find a solution to solve something that is very difficult. So if you're out in the middle of the jungle and you know you're being hunted by a lion, you're probably going to form a strategy to prevent the lion from hurting you. Now, if you're a genius, that's great. But if you're a person with willpower, you're probably going to find a better solution or you're going to find more solutions because you have the desire to find the solutions. A good chance of somebody who is a genius with no motivation, they're probably going to be smart and they're probably going to do one smart thing, but they're probably going to be eaten because they're lazy. It's really important that willpower is an ingredient in our life. And the sad thing is, all of us have access to it because we have souls. And our souls want to connect with other souls. Our souls want to help other souls. That is part of our makeup. Now, your life may have changed you in a way that you think you don't want to have anything to do with anybody. You don't want to help anybody. You can't stand people. You don't want to be around them. Blah, blah, blah. Well, if that's the life you live, you have that choice, but you are neglecting your soul. Your soul is what drives your human life. If you're really being what you were meant to be, you're a soul living a human life. That is what we are. But we, as humans, have decided to be humans with a soul. Jesus was a soul living a human life. He was an example of what our life would look like if we led with our soul instead of our human. Many people get that. There are many people in this world that are very loving, generous souls who understand what it is like to put yourself last instead of first because there is a benefit to it. And the benefit is you leave memories behind. You leave a legacy behind you. And when you die, people will remember you because you did not put yourself first. You put them first. And in that, you served yourself too. You know, it's really important to understand that we as people, temptation is a huge thing that we have to negotiate. And there's also, the muscle that controls the willpower does not, yeah, it does a whole lot more than just keep our impulses in check. It's part of a larger set of executive functions involved in self-monitoring, coping with stressors, weighing alternatives, making decisions. It's called your navigator, all of which draw the same limited energy source. Your navigation needs to always take into account the energy consumed by temptation, the calories consumed by temptation, the outcomes of being susceptible to temptation. It's great to understand that temptation exists, but it's also great to understand that you have to limit it. You have to give it, you don't want to make it run your life. You want to make it be a part of who you are. What I'm saying is, yes, you do want to have that ice cream bar. Yes, you do want to have that meal that you don't have to count the calories. Yes, you do want to have incredible intimacy. Yes, you do want to have a great relationship with your children and your spouse and your friends and the people you work with. You want to have all that. Of course you do. But you have to be present and you have to be vested. And the people that are more present, the people that are more self aware, the people that do meditation and prayer, are oftentimes the people that have a lot more self control. If willpower acts like a muscle, we can strengthen it through exercise. Evident that, and the exercise is using it, using the willpower to stop us from doing negative things. It's very important to understand that your will is your essence and you want to save the gas and you want to learn how to read your own gas tank and understand when you're giving too much gas and how you're using it and what it's consuming. If you are going to be a person who's obsessed on somebody, let's say you're married and you're obsessed on having an affair with someone else, your energy is going to go elsewhere. And everybody in your life that depends on you, that cares about you, that you've built and that you've committed to, is going to understand that you're just giving a half-assed commitment. They're going to get that. These people that just exist on the planet without really feeling emotion, you think that nobody knows? Everybody knows. We're all human. We understand when somebody is a half-assed person that's not available. You don't want to be that. You need to be present. And you need to first admit, I have no feelings. I need to start getting in touch with them. That's the beginning to healing. There's also this need to alleviate pain. People that are in pain are highly impulsive because all they want is to be out of pain. And if you have a lot of emotional pain, as a matter of fact, suicide is pain management. It's where you're at a point where your back, let's say your back is broken and nobody can fix it. And so you think, I can't live this way. I'm just going to have to die because I don't know what else to do. I can't live with a broken back for the rest of my life. And so pain can really drive a lot of our lives. But what we have to understand is when we learn to manage our pain, we are learning to manage temptation. All right, that's our show. I want to thank everybody for listening. I love hearing from you. You You could do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com, or libsyn, libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, we avoid temptation unless we can't resist it. Also, we most often resist many things except temptation. Also, the way to get rid of temptation